Welcome to Unreal Gems. In the last video you saw that the automatic creation was not perfect and it had a lot of problems, and I mentioned that we were going to fix them now, creating the physics asset manually. In the next videos we are going to dive deep into that process. In terms of this one, we are going to create the lower body first. We will take a look at how to create rigid bodies and constraints, and all of the options that you will need for that purpose. By the end of the video, we will have all of the lower extremities covered, and you will have a basic understanding of how to create physics assets manually. Okay, so the first step in the manual rigid body creation is going to be getting rid of all the old rigid bodies, because as you know, the old ones were created automatically and they were created in the wrong place and they are not going to work. If we simulate, you can see that everything is twisting and making weird turns. So let's go ahead and get rid of all of them because they were created in the wrong bones, the twist bones, and that's the reason why they are making those weird behaviors, and right now as is, they don't work for us. So let's go ahead and show all of the bones, so later we can create the rigid bodies, and now we can use Ctrl A to select everything, and with everything selected, we are going to be able to press delete, and with pressing delete, everything is gone, no rigid bodies, we can start fresh. And now if I try to simulate anything, you are going to see that it is not going to do anything because we don't have rigid bodies, so there is nothing to simulate, and that's that. Okay, so now we have to start dealing with all of the bones in the skeleton and start creating the correct rigid bodies instead of the wrong ones. So let's go ahead and do that and start with the pelvis. So right click and click on Add Replace Bodies. That is going to use the settings that we have on the bottom right, and when you click Add Replace Bodies, it's going to use them to create the new rigid body. And if the skeleton is created in the correct way, you are going to see the proper rigid body appear. But as you can see, this is an actor core skeleton without post-processing on my part on Maya, because I wanted to make it more difficult and a real case instead of a pre-made one with easy problems to solve. So here you can see that I had to resize the rigid body because of the bone size of the skeleton, because it was not properly created. So I have to move it, resize it, and deal with all of the problems that arise from not having the proper skeleton. I already showed you how to create it, but I wanted you to know how to deal with them anyway, so that's why I did it this way. And when I am satisfied with the position and all of that, we can go ahead and maybe make it smaller to fit the spine better, to fit the pelvis better. And as you can see, I have two things popping out of the waist of my character. So here we are going to use Add Shapes because we need to account for those. We could make the rigid body bigger, but it is going to be too big because it's going to account for more than the pelvis, and we don't want that. So we can go ahead and simulate. So you can see right now how it looks. You can see that there is only one rigid body. So when you simulate, it's going to move everything in a block, and that's correct because we only have one rigid body, so everything is moving with it. That's not what we want, but we are going to add more rigid bodies to get a proper ragdoll. For now, let's add some shapes to deal with the things on the left and right of the pelvis. So we can go ahead and place the rigid bodies in the proper way. In the constraint graph, you can see that the body count has been incremented in 1, and you can see now that this bone has two shapes associated. This is going to help making the simulation more realistic. We can add the next one. Again, same process. These rigid bodies are going to be stuck to the body, so you are going to see them move with the pelvis. Okay, so let's now go ahead and simulate so you can see what I mean. So let's click on simulate and you can see that now does not bounce the same. It accounts for those things on the left and right of the pelvis, for the armor. So as you can see, we have improved the simulation quite a lot with two simple steps, and in terms of performance, you can get infinite amount of rigid bodies. Again, they have a cost, so don't go overboard, but you can go ahead and make them as realistic as possible according to your render budget and to your game budget. So if we now add a second rigid body for the thigh, you are going to see that a constraint is created with the pelvis. That's what we want, and again, we need to resize everything because of the actor core skeleton. So I'm just using the same process as before, and you can see that it is quite tedious, but it is what it is. We have to do it. We have to properly position everything and properly size everything. And now we have to deal with the new constraint. This is something new. Let's go ahead and simulate so you can see what it does. It's creating a weird effect, kind of funny in my opinion, but we don't want this. So let's go ahead and fix it. Okay, so the problem here is having the angular limits free. So what we need to do is just get rid of that, and Ctring won't split. And when we provide some limits for those angles, this is not going to happen. So let's go ahead and try to get rid of that problem. If you want, you can, when things are like all over the place, you can go ahead and instead of simulating everything, you can simulate selected with a rigid body selected. And that is going to let you fiddle with the rigid body without everything else simulating, and it's going to be a lot easier to find problems and to debug things. So just remember that. I'm going to use it all the time. So right now, let's go ahead and change those things in the constraint so that Ctring does not split. Okay, so let's go ahead and use the swing one motion, and instead of free, let's go ahead and lock it. And we are going to see now what happens when we simulate the rigid bodies. So let's go ahead and do it. You can see that everything is moving in block. That's normal because we have locked all of the axes of rotation, so everything is moving together. So right now we don't want that. We want the leg to move on its own, but properly. Oh, and by the way, try not to lock everything because usually it is better to lock as less things as possible. Okay, so now let's go ahead and rotate the constraint because right now it was facing the wrong direction. We need to point down the length of the bone, so where it is going to hang, and right now it was pointing sideways. So the first thing is just rotating using the gizmo, the constraint, so it was facing the proper direction. What we are accomplishing with this is that that red cone that is facing the correct direction now starts off the simulation properly and not pointing sideways, and the leg would do something weird. If we now simulate selected, you can see that the leg is hanging in the proper way. You can see that it is not perfect right now. Control click, by the way, right click, control right click to move the rigid body so we can test everything. And with that, you are going to be able to test your simulation if everything is working properly. You need to simulate as much as possible because problems appear quickly, and weird problems, and if you don't know where they are coming from, you are going to have trouble. No gravity simulation is perfect to pinpoint constraint problems, so there is no gravity and things should be static if you don't do anything. And if you see movement, it can mean that there is a problem. Again, control right click to move the leg. You can see with this mode that we are clipping the right leg. Great for testing the limits of the extremities. So as you can see, we are already making use of those debugging tools that are really great. Okay, so now we need to fix that problem because we don't want the legs to clip when we ragdoll. So we can do that with the swing limit that is going to limit the angles that you can move, but this is not going to be enough. We need to rotate the starting position of the simulation. We want the same swing motion, but starting in a different place, so we can move more the leg to the right. We can do that holding Alt while rotating. So if we simulate again now with the change in the orientation, you can see that this is not going to be clipping again the right leg. So you can see that we can move more to the left than we can move to the right, and that is done changing the starting position of the simulation. I did it with Alt rotate, so I held Alt when I was rotating. So remember that, Alt before rotating, if not, it is going to move the complete constraint. So you want to move only the limits and not the starting position. That is what you can see there in that red line that doesn't have an arrow and that is dashed. So that's what I did, just held Alt and rotated the constraint, and that makes it so the limits rotate on their own, and that is perfect for what we wanted. So let's go ahead now and lock the swing 1 motion and deal with the swing 2 motion, which is the other degree of freedom that we have. Let's simulate and see how it affects the rigid body simulation. So let's go ahead and simulate selected, and with Control right click, I'm going to move forward and move back. Move forward, move back. Looks okay, but the range of motion is not completely correct. I'm no animator, no artist, but I'm a programmer, but I don't think it is completely correct. So let's go ahead and up the swing to limit so it can move further. And as you can see, I'm going with 65 degrees. And right now, let's go ahead and see the difference. You're going to see the leg travel further, and maybe we should, again, with Alt and rotate, we should maybe alter those, that starting position and those limits. But since I don't want this video to take forever, I think it is quite enough for the thigh, and that we are okay. So let's go ahead and activate both limits at the same time so we can test the full range of motion in the leg. So we are going to simulate again. You can see now that it is a 3D cone. Those are the limits together, and with that we are going to be able to see how the leg is going to act with both of the limits being enforced in the simulation. So right now, let's go ahead and select the rigid body and simulate selected with Alt-Shift-I, or if you don't want the selected rigid body, Alt-I. That's going to make it quick to simulate. I'll use it constantly. Right now, you can see that the leg is moving fine with Control right click, and so that's that. The thigh is correct, and we are going to move on to the next rigid body. So I'm going to simulate everything with Alt-I, and since there is no gravity, you don't want to see any movement unless you Control right click and do the forces yourself. So apply forces to the rigid bodies yourself, and you are going to see the character float because there is no gravity. So this means that everything is correct or looks correct for now, and we can move on to the next rigid body. Okay, so now we are going to deal with the calf creation. So again, we select it and go ahead and add replace bodies. Same thing as always. The bone is going to be the wrong size and maybe even the wrong position in the body or the constraint. Again, you have to look at everything because the automatic creation makes a lot of mistakes. So let's do the same as before. When we are done, we can simulate selected and see how the leg is acting. You are going to see that the constraint is free in every single angle, so that's going to give us problems and it's going to look weird as always. So we need to again deal with the constraint and make sure that it is properly working. If we select the thigh instead of the calf, you can see that when you simulate selected, the bones that are down the chain are also simulated, while the ones that are up in the chain are not. So this is quite useful to see both rigid bodies working together, but again, we are first going to deal only with the calf. We need to go step by step, because if not, we can have a lot of problems and not know where they are coming from. Let's go ahead and use a hotkey to change the swing one motion, swing two motion, and the twist motion. And one is for swing one motion, it switches between limited and locked. Two is for swing two motion, and for twist motion is the 3. And when you press the buttons, it's going to flip between both of them. So again, we need to rotate without Alt. Remember, we need to rotate everything together right now. We are not looking for different limits in each side. So we just do it without pressing Alt. And right now it is pointing again down, which is what we want. And the constraint is properly placed. Remember to always check the position of the constraint, not only the rotation. Sometimes the position is wrong and it can cause weird problems. Right now we can see that the side movement is too much, so a leg would never move like that, so we need to fix that. You can do it in the constraint. We have two options, either use limited with a very low number, like here. As you can see, it's going to make the leg not move laterally. So if we control click, you can see that it's not moving, and that's more or less what we want. But I think here the proper way of doing it is just locking the swing motion, and that's pretty much it. So you don't need to even have a lower limit. So let's go ahead and lock it, and let's go for the second swing motion. This one, it does have an angular limit. It does have a proper movement, and we need to again rotate, because it is going to move more to one side than the other. Again, Alt and rotate. So hold Alt and rotate. You can see that the starting position of the constraint is close to the left limit. So that's going to make it so we can move the leg more back than forward, which is the same that should happen. So you can see that that is more or less the starting limit. And if we go back, we can flex properly the leg with the knee. So everything is looking great for now. And you can see that everything looks correct and as it should look in real life, more or less. We need to go ahead and deal with the next bone, so the foot. Here we had a miracle. The bone was properly sized, so the automatic creation worked perfectly. Even then, we need to do some adjustments. Let's go ahead and create an extra shape for the heel. Maybe it is too much, but I wanted it to be really good and intersect perfectly with other props. So let's go ahead and dial it in with a final touch to the foot rigid body. And with that, everything looks good, and we can now go ahead and start dealing with the constraint. So we have again all the motions. We start by locking them, and then one by one customizing them. Let's go ahead and rotate it. Again, it was wrong without pressing Alt. So just rotate the constraint so it faces the way that the foot is facing. We lock it because it looked correct, and now we are dealing with the swing to motion, and we are going to see if everything is looking good. For now, maybe it has too much movement to the sides because the other one was already looking good, and let's deal with that first. So let's go ahead and turn down the swing one limit. That is going to make it so the foot cannot move as much to the sides. Okay, so let's move on to the swing to motion. And here we are going to need to make it so the foot does not move forward too much and it can move more backward than forward. So just as our real foot. So for that, we are going to use Alt Rotate and we are going to switch the starting position of the constraint. You can see it there. And now if we go ahead and simulate, you are going to see that the foot can move backward enough. Well, I have ground, so it is making some weird things, but you can see that it goes backward more than it goes forward, which is what we wanted. So we are satisfied with that and it is looking good. We now just need to test that the complete motion, the complete rotation angles are working properly and that we have full range of motion in the foot. I did it again with the one. Remember the hotkey. You can see the cone now in 3D with both limits. And with that, we are going to be able to simulate selected and see how the foot is moving in every direction. Control right click and drag the rigid body from the foot. We can go up, down, to the sides, and it's looking like everything is working properly. So again, testing it a little more. You can see the heel is not moving due to the bind skin that Actor Core created. It is not perfect. The calf needs to move. If not, it's going to make the heel weird, but when you move everything together, you are going to see that everything is working properly and no problems arise. So now we need to deal with the other leg and we don't want to do everything again from scratch. So we can press right click and mirror and you can see that the bodies are copied and moved to the other side, but you can see there are a lot of errors. So we are going to need to fix them. I'm not going to detail the whole process again, so let's go ahead and do it. I'm momentarily moving this away from that because I need to deal with the heel and it is almost impossible to select. And with that, we are almost done. Everything is looking good, but we need to check the constraints because as with the rigid bodies, the constraints also can have errors when they are copied. In fact, you can see that in the thigh constraint, we have a huge error. It's pointing the wrong direction. So we need to deal with that and fix it, or the ragdoll is going to look really bad. So again, let's go ahead and do it in both swing limits and real quick and check the knees and everything and see that everything is fine. Everything is looking pretty much a-okay. So we are almost ready to test the ragdoll in our lower body completely. So let's go ahead and simulate for now this leg before doing it with everything. Remember that we need to go step by step. If not, we are going to have really weird problems. Everything looks good, as you can see. So let's now check everything else for errors. Let's check the other swing motion. It's looking good, as you can see. And with that, we are almost ready to test the whole body, because right now everything is looking fine. Let's go ahead and just rotate a little bit the feet because they were not perfect, but again, it's just a minor adjustment. You could leave it like that and nothing would happen. Okay, so let's now start simulating both legs. You can see that they are working fine. Let's go ahead and deal with some of the problems. So we need to use no floor collisions so they can hang instead of being on the floor. And right now you can see that we have a small problem, that there is permanent motion. So no energy is being dissipated in the physics simulation, so the leg is going to swing infinitely, and we need to deal with that and fix it. If not, the simulation is going to look weird. So let's go ahead and select the extremities, so in this case the foot, and we are going to use angular damping and linear damping. This means that as the simulation progresses, the linear motion and the angular motion is going to be dissipated. Check out the table if you are still not clear on what they do. So as you can see, it is losing force. With higher numbers, as time goes by, the foot will stabilize, which is what we wanted. Let's do it for the other foot because it's going to have the same problem. So let's just go ahead and deal with it. Turn the numbers up. The higher the numbers are, you are going to get more damping, so it's going to stop earlier. Let's simulate both legs. You can see that they stop more or less quickly. Remember that the character is hanging, so we need to test now with the floor collisions so we can see if everything is looking good. As you can see with the floor collisions, it's going to stabilize even earlier. You can see that they stop right away. And you could also put more damping also in the other rigid bodies, but I don't think it is necessary, and it's going to look better, I think, if you just do it in the extremities. So with this, we have our lower body ragdoll ready, and in the next video, deal with the rest. Well, so that's it for this video. I hope that you have a better understanding of how to create rigid bodies and constraints. Join me for the next parts in which we will create the upper body. If this video has been useful to you, please go ahead, like and subscribe, and we'll see each other in the next videos. Huge shout out and thanks to all my Patreons. As you know, making these videos takes a ton of time and effort because I research in depth all of the topics that I cover. So if you want me to keep making awesome stuff, consider supporting me on Patreon.